So I'm going to quickly just overview the Amid Aleph of the Daf, and I want to get into Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish on Amid Beis, and then, if we have time, get back to on Amid Aleph the Tosfos as well. These are big, you said these things. So the previous Gemara had a question from Levi to Rebbe. Levi asked Rebbe, why did the Mishnah only count 15 and not more? And he says, and Rebbe responded, it's a plugta l'kamari. It's not, Rebbe actually responded, he said, you didn't turn your brain on today. What kind of question is that? And the question we have is, what was the basis of Rebbe's disappointment in Levi's question? The Gemara says, plugta l'kamari, our Mishnah is only things that are absolutely going to be Isser Erva and not possible, and not have Yibum. And in this 16th case that he wanted, which was a woman that his father had relations out of wedlock, whether that would be an Isser or not. And that's machlokes whether it's Asr to him or not. Now, the Gemara's essential work through was that we have a Bryce of Rabbi Chia, that in each one of the cases it is possible to have two sisters and a surah lazeh muteris lazeh. If some reason one is going to be two sister wives, two tzaras, right? And if one of them is prohibited to one of the potential miyabmin, so then it would be permissible. And so essentially, just to go through the end of last week's daf, you have three brothers, Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. And Ruvain is married to two women, and now he passed away. So the two remaining brothers have the two Yevamot, and each one can do a Yibum to either one. If they came from two different brothers, now each one is Achos Zekukase. That means there were four brothers that passed, four brothers, each one married to sisters. So Reuven was married to Rachel, and Leah, and Shimon was married to Leah. And now these two passed away, and there's two remaining brothers. Each one of them cannot do Yibum. Why not? Because each one has an obligation to do Yibum to both, meaning each one of them is the wife of his Zekuka. Again, Zika works that when Reuven passed away, his one wife is now obligated to all three of these, but not really to this one because he's married to the sister. So to either one of these. So Rachel, his wife, Rachel, his widow, is obligated in Zika and therefore in Yibum to both, or either of the remaining brothers. Call them Levi and Yehuda. Two separate people, not Levi Yehuda, Levi and Yehuda. Yeah. So Rachel is obligated is Zakuk, right? The Zika, passing of Reuven's marriage over to Levi and Yehuda, each one. Now, when Shimon also dies, and what's left is Levi and Yehuda, Leah as well is obligated in Yibum from both of them. So neither can do Yibum. Why not? Because if let's say Levi wants to do Yibum, to anyone he's going to do Yibum, the other one is already also Zakuk to him, meaning it's essentially his somewhat wife's sister. Each one of them is somewhat his wife because he's inherited a marriage from the brother. He has Zika from the deceased brother to Rachel, and separately from the other deceased brother to Leah. Therefore, each one of them is his wife's sister. his zakuka, right, which is the term for a zika kind of marriage, this beginning of a transferred marriage, he is a sister. So each one of them cannot do yibum, but they have to do chalitza because the zika happened. What Rabbi Chia's Brisa says is that if, however, one of them is prohibited, so then it's not his wife's sister, because the zika cannot come to him. She never came, so it's not a sister to his wife because that zika couldn't come. And the Gemara says that could apply to each one, but as we'll see here, as our Gemara says, it cannot apply to the sisters that are born from different mothers out of wedlock. That's really the case that it couldn't. Rashi has a lengthy explanation in the scenario and the diagramming of each one of these cases. But the concept is, when there's a zika from Reuven's death, that Rachel becomes passed on to the brothers. And then when Shimon dies, Leah gets passed on to the brothers. She can't really have Yibum done to her because they are already somewhat married to her sister. And therefore they can't do Yibum to her because her sister Rachel, who's the widow of the first husband, first brother that died, also is in somewhat of a relationship, some Zika marriage to them. So there are two sisters that fall in Yibum that cannot happen unless one of them is prohibited. And then the other one is allowed to do Yibum. And that's what's not possible over here by this other case. And that's why Rebbe said we're not dealing with this case. The Gemara proposed another idea that this doesn't work according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Ashi says that Rebbe does follow even by Plukta, and the reason why he had a question of this is because he should have seen our Mishnah is talking about Rabbi Yehuda, who says that there is a prohibition with a woman that was connected to the father out of wedlock. In any case, the Gemara goes through a question of what happens if somebody transgressed various arayas, and then there's a yibum potential out of that. Those would be cases. The Gemara ultimately says that that we do say that it'll passel this idea of anusas aviv, this out of wedlock relation with his father, would be a prohibition. And we could have said this extra one. Now I want to get to the next Gemara because this next Gemara is really crucial to the fundamental understanding of how Yibum works, and will further develop what we've already been developing in Yibum throughout the Masechta. We began with the Masechta in a simple case of Yibum. Reuven dies. He has a surviving brother, Shimon. Shimon now has a transfer of Reuven's marriage to Shimon. That's called Zika. Shimon now has a mitzvah to marry this woman, and if not, he does chalitza. Prior to the death of Reuven, this woman was his erva, his brother's wife, Eishes Ach. Eishes Ach is a regular erva, and then the Torah suspended that avera, or the mitzvah supersedes that avera. We saw two opinions. Is it dechuya or hutra? Is the prohibition gone, permissible now? It suspended this prohibition because of the mitzvah? Or did we say, no, that the prohibition is still there, the mitzvah simply supersedes it, and even though, as we saw over 5-6 blot, there's no such thing as an asay that supersedes a losasay sheyesh bakares. We saw Tosfos in Daf Gimel said no, that we will say that the asay, the mitzvah, will make it supersede even a lav sheyesh bakares. Why? Because mitzvah sebekach, that is the mitzvah. The definition of the mitzvah, the structure of the mitzvah is go ahead and marry that which was prohibited to you yesterday on account of being your brother's wife. I want you to marry her and absorb that marriage of the deceased brother so you can establish the home of your brother. So that mitzvah is theirs. But whether we say hutra, that the prohibition is suspended, or we say dechuya, that the prohibition is still there, but the mitzvah supersedes it. That's what, in a simple case, Reuven, two brothers, one wife, he dies, she passes on to Shimon, the surviving brother, and that's the mitzvah. But that is very simple when we're talking about one surviving brother and one wife. But as the Mishnah in the beginning of the Masechta already complicated it with what happens if Reuven had two wives. And if he had two wives, and one of them is prohibited, can the other one have yibum? To which, as we'll see, it's the halacha beis Hillel, tzoras erba asura. That since Reuven, when he dies, can't pass on the entirety of the marriage, meaning both of the wives, he also cannot pass on even one. And even the tzara, the sister wife of the erba, would also be prohibited. Okay. Now we're going to get to a further complication, which we've already seen. What happens if there are multiple brothers? But here we're going to analyze, and really, we're going to have a machlokes Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish that is going to open for us a big discussion as to what is the structure that happens when there are multiple brothers and maybe multiple wives, and one brother does yibum with or chalitza with one other one. So let's say there are five brothers. Now, five brothers, and one of them passed away, childless. So his wife, now his widow, essentially, she is still married to him, in as much as that marriage gets passed on to the brothers. To which brother? So the halacha is to any of the brothers, even though that we'll see the mitzvah, it is preferable for the eldest to go, and then the next, and then the next. But the halacha is it goes to any of the brothers. Meaning that any of the brothers now has a mitzvah to reestablish the household of the deceased brother, and marry the wife, or really complete the marriage. The marriage is somewhat passed on already with zika. Now, zika to whom? It's passed on to whom? Seemingly to somewhat to all of them, or to either of them. How do we say this? So, where does this ramification come out? Now, what's clear is, as soon as one brother does yibum, it's his wife, and she's prohibited to the rest of the brothers. That's obvious. But even if he does chalitza, which essentially ends the zika to himself, well, what about the other brothers? So that ends the zika to the other brothers as well. So the eldest of the brothers comes up and he says, I'm not going to marry you, and let's do chalitza. She takes off his shoe. They do chalitza, done. Chalitza is done, no marriage. The other brothers are now allowed to marry her? Are they allowed to marry her? Why would they be allowed to marry her? Because yesterday they were allowed to marry her. In fact, yesterday they had a mitzvah. Now, one brother divorced her by doing chalitza. But the other brothers, yesterday they had this woman was permitted to them. Is she permitted to them today? Well, actually, 2 days ago, it was an erva to them. So what happens? Does it go back to that status? Or does it remain in some heter? Or something else happens? Again, Reuven dies and he has 4 surviving brothers. One brother does chalitza. Chalitza ends the zika to the brothers. On Sunday before Reuven died, this woman was prohibited to them in an erva of the brother's wife, Eshasah. Monday, they each had a mitzvah to do yibum with this woman. Tuesday, one of the brothers did chalitza. Now what? Does it go back to the original isser? Is there some new isser, or does the prohibition gone, and now they're actually mutter and they're allowed to marry? So that's really what we're going to open up in this machlokas. Is that clear, the question that we're addressing?
And in the scenario where the brother would do yibum and not chalitza, then it seems obvious that it would go back to an isser of eshasach, right, for the other remaining brothers, right?
Well, I don't know if it'll go back to, it may
Not
be
back
new.
to it, yeah, it would progress to a new
Right,
eshasach.
it may be a new eshasach or the old one. We don't know which one it'll be, but there's an eshasach.
Yeah.
There it's going to be also, we understand, because right now the second brother is married to this woman, and so it's the brother's wife again. We're only addressing, but what happens if he ended that marriage, the zika? He ended the zika by making a chalitza. Now she's no longer an eshasach because that was wiped away already with the mitzvah. Right? Now, if we understand this question really is much stronger if we understand that hutra meaning the prohibition is suspended. The erva is gone. So then it makes sense to have such a question. Because yes, it's true, on Sunday we had an erva, but when the brother died, the first brother died, the erva was gone because the mitzvah superseded that, and not superseded. The mitzvah made that there was a suspension of this erva. The isser is gone, putra, and therefore we now have a question. Well, does it ever come back, or is there another prohibition that comes back? However, if we say that the mitzvah supersedes it, then it's much harder to say that there would be a prohibition that the erva didn't come back. The erva really never left. It was just that while I have a mitzvah, the mitzvah supersedes it. The mitzvah's gone, then of course, if the mitzvah is no longer there, then the Eishas Ach is back in place. So that's going to be a question, because Tosfos is the one that said that the asay supersedes the los asay. It's on account of that mitzvah bekach. That is the structure of the mitzvah. Great. So we talked about that back then, but that means that really the isser was never suspended. And then it should be obvious that as soon as one brother does chalitza, that remains the isser for everyone else. So let's see this Gemara. We are on the fourth line on Yud Amud Beis. Sorry. Itma. Sorry, that was the previous Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. We're on about 10, 12 lines in, second word in, Itma. It was said, Hacholetz liyavimtoi v'chazav v'kitsha. Somebody did chalitza, and then he goes ahead and tries to remarry him. He himself. So Reuven passes away. His wife is Zika brings the marriage over to Shimon. Shimon on Monday says, no, I'm not interested. Or she says, I'm not interested. They do chalitza. Great. Chalitza's done. Tuesday, they wake up and they say, you know what? That was a shame. We should have done that. And he goes and buys her a ring and he says, Ariyat Mukadeshus. He does kiddushin to her. Does that kiddushin take effect? Now, as you remember, anytime there's an erva kiddushin does not take effect. Because ein kiddushin types in, the chayv increases. Erva, if the erva goes back to the original erva, of course the kiddushin won't take effect. However, if we say the kiddushin, that the erva does not come back, and it's just either permissible or chayve lavin, well then it should work. Amar Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, "Hu ein chayav ala chalutza kares va'acher chayav ala chalutza kares." He himself has no kares with the chalutza, because he himself he had the mitzvah with her. He did chalitza. He did chalitza. She is now permissible to him, as far as erva goes. Now she's prohibited, and we'll see another prohibition. But the erva prohibition is gone, and therefore kiddushin would take effect. And she's not allowed to consummate that kiddushin in that marriage, and therefore they would need a get. But the kiddushin would take effect. But the brothers, if they tried that, it would not work. But the brothers do have kares, meaning the erva prohibition comes back to the brothers. Alatzara, bein hu vein achim. However, if Reuven, who died, had two wives, only on the one he did chalitza does he have a mitzvah. Did he have the mitzvah? And they did chalitza. But the tzara, the other wife, the Isser Eshesach comes back even for him. So essentially what Reish Lakish is saying is, it all goes back to the original prohibition. Besides for one, he himself that did chalitza, for him it doesn't go back. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Bein hu uveina achin ein chayav lo chalutza kares v'lo yatzara kares. Nothing. There is no chalitza. After the chalitza, there's no prohibitions. There's no erva for him, for the brothers, for this woman, for the other woman that the mitzvah could have been, because there were two wives of the deceased. No erva goes back. There is no erva. My time in the Reish Lakish. The Gemara says, okay, so what's the basis of Reish Lakish? Amakra asher leyivne. The Torah says that the chalitza is called beis chalutz hanal, and we say kacha yas lish, so shall be done to the man asher leyivne beis achid, will not build the household of his brother. Not who chose not to, past tense or present tense, but future tense. Asher leyivne. Once he did this, he may no longer do yibum. He may no longer marry this woman. He may no longer establish a brother's household. So lo yivne says a future. That's it. You're done. After chalitza, prohibited. Kivin shalabana, if he didn't do the binyan, meaning he didn't do yibum, shuv lo yivne, he cannot do it anymore. Now, so Reish Lakish explains, he that did chalitza has the lo yivne, he cannot build that marriage anymore. But the other brothers, they didn't do chalitza, so they don't have a lo yivne, they shall not build a household, because they didn't actually do the chalitza. So rather, what happens there? It goes back to the original erva. But the brothers, as they had a prohibition on Sunday on account of it being the brother's wife, that goes back to that case because there's no mitzvah anymore. And only on this woman that did chalitza is there this prohibition of don't come back and reestablish a brother's household because you already did chalitza. Hatzara, but the tzara who never did chalitza, the original prohibition is still there. Rabbi Yochanan says no such thing. Can it be such a thing that yesterday, meaning on Monday, the day after the brother died, each one of them had a mitzvah. So if he wants, he could do yibum to any one of them could do yibum to any one of the wives, or any one of them can have chalitza done with any one of the wives. And today you're going to tell them that yesterday you had a mitzvah to marry this woman, and today if you make kiddushin, it doesn't take effect. Impossible. And now it goes back to a kares. So that would seem sufficient for Rabbi Yochanan's response. He says, no, it can't be. But Rabbi Yochanan adds another line here. Ella ihu shlichusa de achim ka'avid, ihi shlichusa de tzara ka'avid. Rather, he says, whenever yibum or chalitza are being done, it is being done on behalf of all the participants that have the mitzvah. Rabbi Yochanan says, there are 5 brothers, 1 died, 4 surviving brothers. One of them does yibum or chalitza. He's not only doing it for himself, he is doing it on behalf of all the brothers. And when the woman that the chalitza or the yibum is being done with, that's being done on behalf of all of the sister wives. It's all the mitzvah is happening on behalf of everyone for one. Shlichusa, the achim kav, doing a shlichus. Now it seems like 2 separate answers. Rabbi Yochanan could have said, no, they're all doing shlichus. Rabbi Yochanan could have said like this, Reish Lakish, you are right. You're right that once the person who did the mitzvah no longer has the Erva prohibition, he has a new prohibition, the prohibition of lo yivneh. He can no longer build the brother's household in the future because he's already did chalitza. That's great, but they all did that because the mitzvah was done for everyone, so they all have that. It would have been sufficient for Rabbi Yochanan to just say that, or Rabbi Yochanan could have just said the first line. It's impossible that you had something permissible yesterday and without any action is going to become prohibited. Levi, the 3rd brother, Yehuda, the 4th brother, Yisachar, the 5th brother, they all were permitted yesterday to this woman. Not only permitted, they had a mitzvah. And because one brother went and did chalitza, they are now in a kares. That can't be. That's the challenge that Rabbi Yochanan said. So it seems like 2 answers that responses that Rabbi Yochanan says. Why do we need the 2? Is that clear? The two aspects are clear?
I have a question regarding Reish Lakish and the Asher Lo Yivneh.
Okay,
Why?
give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I just want to say, the question of Rabbi Yochanan, or recognizing the 2 aspects of Rabbi Yochanan's response, is that clear or should I repeat that? That wasn't a yes or no, it was either. Somebody give me a clue. 2 aspects of Rabbi Yochanan. Again, one is he says that the brothers are doing the second aspect. He said was the brothers all had it done on their behalf as a shlichus, as him representing them. So then they have their mitzvah done too. Or the first part is how can yesterday be permissible, today become prohibited without any action, without anything happening. So it seems 2 aspects. Yes, Charlie, what's the question on Reish Lakish?
My question is, if he's using this pasuk of Asher Lo Yivneh to say that once he did chalitza, that he can't build his brother's household, but if it doesn't revert back to him being the Isser being from the original Erva, why can't he just marry her to build his own household?
Right. So that would be a separate prohibition, lo yivneh. The term lo yivneh, the way Reish Lakish is learning it, is that it indicates he can no longer marry this woman. Kiven shalebana shul lo yivneh, you cannot marry this woman. That's the meaning of lo yivneh. Not you cannot establish the brother's marriage, because that anyhow is already done, because once you did chalitza, the zika is over. So you can no longer have the brother's marriage. So why did the Torah say lo yivneh? Lo yivneh means you can no longer marry this woman. That's the meaning the Reish Lakish has of lo yivneh. You're right. Charlie is asking a very good question. The meaning of lo yivneh is you can no longer establish a brother's marriage. Great, well, maybe I can marry on behalf of myself, right? The zika is over, but then it would be sufficient to just say chalitza is done. Lo yibana. Why lo yivneh? Lo yivneh means you can no longer marry this woman. However, the erva prohibition doesn't go back. So, Taisvis essentially, the one way, the simplest way to go about this is to say, you know what the machlokas is? The machlokas is Reish Lakish says that the mitzvah was just superseded. Mitzvah just supersedes the prohibition. but the prohibition, the Issur, remained in place the whole time, the mitzvah goes away. The prohibition is there. Rish Lakish, that's Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, the mitzvah suspended the prohibition. And therefore, yesterday was permissible, today remains permissible. So the question that we had, the machlokas we had between Rashi and Tosfos at the beginning of the Masechta, do we say that the mitzvah supersedes the prohibition? The Issur is doche the lav, or is it a heter? Is it a hutra? Does it make it permissible? It suspends the prohibition? That seems to be a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Now, we never say that. Why wouldn't we say that? Because then how did Rashi understand? Rashi, who is interpreting the Gemara, how did he, at the beginning of the Masechta, how do you understand Rish Lakish? And if this is a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, why did Tosfos pick like Rish Lakish and say that it supersedes, that it's a asay dochalos asay, and works under that, right? They both, Rashi and Tosfos, knew this machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and yet they said their opinions, meaning they both understood that according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, their opinion would be correct. Rashi understood that Yibum works in a mechanism of hutra, that it suspends the prohibition, there's no prohibition left, and both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish could work this way. And Tosfos understood that the mechanism of Yibum is, regardless of, is that the Issur is still in place, and even though that the Issur is still in place, it supersedes, the Asay, the mitzvah supersedes it, and that would work both according to Rabbi Yochanan and according to Rish Lakish. So in general, when you have a machlokas in the Gemara, and you have machlokas in the Rishonim, we generally say the machlokas in the Rishonim and the machlokas in the Gemara is not the same. Because then the Rashi and Tosfos wouldn't argue about something that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish already argued about. Right? That makes sense. So therefore, we have to look at this machlokas and be able to explain the machlokas both if we say that it's asay dochalos asay like Tosfos, or if we say it's a hutra and it's totally permissible. So we have a clue here, and Tosfos, thankfully, Rashi is somewhat opaque about telling us how he understands this machlokas. But Tosfos is not, and Tosfos tells us that a new concept. There's a concept where if the Torah has a mega prohibition, an Issur Kares, and the Torah wanted to put it back and then permitted it, even though that was on account of a mitzvah. The Torah wanted to put it back nitkoi, it extracted it from its place and put it into a new prohibition. Essentially, the Torah suspended the previous prohibition or extracted it, nitkoi, extracted it from the previous prohibition and moved it to a lower. That's what Tosfos says. Tosfos says that it is a nitkoi from the Ereva and put it into a new Issur of lo yivne. Look at Tosfos in Ihu. This is the third mid-size line. Ihu the koyba lo yivne. Iloy have a ksiv lo yivne. Tosfos says, really, if it had not, the Torah had not written these words lo yivne, hava amina, I may have thought afilu hu al chalutza b'kares, that he goes back to the original Erva prohibition. Tosfos says they all, in other words, according to Rish Lakish, they all go back to the original prohibition. However, minus one, the one couple that did chalitza actually, the Torah extracted it from the kares and turned it into a lav. The Torah said, I don't want you to go back. Since you already did this mitzvah, you did part of the mitzvah. You did the chalitza aspect of the mitzvah instead of the yibum. True, it's not the ideal, but that's what you did. So you're not going to go back to the original erva. You're going back to a lesser degree. I'm extracting the erva, which you should have gone back to, and I'm moving it down to a regular lav. Nitkoi lelav mikaris. Now, is this a erva type of prohibition simply on a lower level, or is it a new prohibition? We don't have time to go into, but that is a great discussion amongst the Achron. Now, what does Rabbi Yochanan say? So Rabbi Yochanan, when he disagrees on this, he's going to have to. We're going to focus on what he says. That Rabbi Yochanan is saying it goes back to. It never goes back. It never goes back to that prohibition. That once it's hutar, it can never go back anymore to that idea. It can't go back. The Torah already suspended that. Now, if Tosfos learns that it's completely suspended, that would be great. But we saw earlier that Tosfos says that it's a asay, that's docha de lo asay. It's only a dechuya. So why doesn't it go back? So there, Rabbi Yochanan has to say the second part. Well, actually, each one is represented by the other. The one who did chalitza represented, he did a shlichus for all of them. And since each one did a chalitza, each one had a chalitza done on their behalf, the mitzvah was done, and it never goes back to that place for them. It never goes back into that, to that prohibition, the original prohibition. So the first aspect, Rabbi Yochanan says, is one. Once there was a prohibition, it cannot go back to the original prohibition. Once it had an issur, once the issur was gone because of a mitzvah, and some aspect of that mitzvah was done, it cannot go back to the original thing. So Rabbi Yochanan needs both aspects. One, that you already had a heter, and if you had a heter, how can it go back? Now we said, wait, why can't it go back? Because the heter was only on account of the mitzvah. The mitzvah superseding the issur. It was an asay docha lo asay. The asay is done. The mitzvah is no longer there. To which he says, yeah, but you did a part of the mitzvah. On behalf of you as well, the chalitza was done. Because the shlichus was done on behalf of everyone. So that's it. So Tosfos also has to say that this Rebbe Baruch Finkel brings rayas from Tosfos multiple places. That Tosfos indeed also holds that even in Rabbi Yochanan we say that there's a nituk, that the Torah, it should have gone back to the original prohibition, because after all the mitzvah is gone and the prohibition was always there. The issur was chai v'kayim. It was simply that you had a mitzvah to supersede that. Once the mitzvah is done, it should go back. But to that we have that since this one brother that did chalitza did so on behalf of everyone, so the Torah, when it said lo yivneh, it should not no longer reestablish it, meaning that the Torah took it from a Torah prohibition, from the Koros prohibition, into a regular lav prohibition. So that's the way the machlokas is understood according to Tosfos. The Rashba has a different mahalach, and the Rashba is not here. The Rashba is in Daf Mem, and in Daf Mem, the Gemara actually asks multiple questions about when chalitza is done. In a second. So the Rashba says like this. The Gemara says in Daf Mem Aleph, Rav and Shmuel have a machlokas. Yevama that hutra v'nesra v'chazer v'hutra. A Yevama that was permissible, prohibited and then permissible. What's the case? Reuven dies, and he has one wife. This wife and now it falls to Shimon. Shimon is supposed to do chalitza or yibum. Then, after that, Shimon goes ahead and does kiddushin to the widow's sister. He's not supposed to, but he did. And he went over to the sister and said, Hareyat Mukadeshes. So she is now, the Yevama is now prohibited as his wife's sister. But at the fall of the Yibum, it was a good Yibum. And she could have been a good Yibum. Then the brother, the surviving brother, married the Yevama's sister, prohibiting the Yevama. But then he divorced, she died. She died, unfortunately. And now, since she died, he wants to go and reestablish that Yibum. So she was permissible when the Yibum when the Zika started, became prohibited because of an action of the surviving brother, and then became Hutar again. So Rav says, goes back to the first permission. And Shmuel says, Ein chazeres lo tera rishon. Machlokas. The Rashba says over there that she doesn't really go back to the mitzvah of Yibum. You can't do Yibum. Rather, what it means is it goes back to the permission that that there's no longer an Issa Eshesach. Meaning, the Rashba says like this. You cannot, once she, so two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven dies. All that's left is Shimon. Shimon goes ahead and he marries Leah after Rachel is already in Zika. After Rachel is already his Yevama, should be marrying him, and he goes ahead and he marries Leah. He shouldn't do that because it's Achos Zekuka, so it's the sister of a woman that is obligated to him in Yibum, but he did it anyhow. And then she dies. So for a moment, however long that Kiddushin lasted, Reuven, Shimon was prohibited with the Yevama. But now that this sister died, now it's permissible again. So the Rashba learns that everybody would hold, you cannot do Yibum anymore. You cannot do Yibum anymore. Why can't you do Yibum? Because it's not fair to a woman. She's mutter, she's aser, mutter again. It's eino darkei noam. It's not the pleasantness of the ways of the Torah. He brings rise for it. We're not going to go into that. But what he does say is, so what did Rav mean when he says that she's back to her permission? Meaning that she is not an erva. Even though he never did yibum to this woman, she will be prohibited to him, but not an erva. Even though we could say, why? The brother, it's your brother's wife, and you don't have a mitzvah anymore. If it's not a mitzvah and your brother's wife, so it should remain an erva. As we said before, the prohibition is there the whole time. There's a mitzvah to do. That supersedes it. The mitzvah is gone. So then, once the mitzvah is gone, the prohibition, the erva goes back in place. And it doesn't. That's the Rashba. And he says, you know how I know this, the Rashba says? Because we see that's what Rabbi Yochanan says, that the original prohibition never goes back. So Rabbi Yochanan's din is the basis for the Rashba. That's what he says. So what we see is the Rashba understood Rabbi Yochanan to say that the heter of the heter of Eshesach, of being a brother's wife that was there when the brother was alive, has gone and is no longer there, and now in its place is the mitzvah of Yibum. And if the mitzvah is not there, still it's not going to go back to its original original Isser. So what's the understanding of the Rashba? So there are those that explain that the basis of this, since the brothers are doing the shlichus of the brothers doing the shlichus of the first brother, the brother that does chalitza is doing the shlichus of the rest of the brothers. So they all have the mitzvah being done. There's no reason for them to be usher at all, because since they did the mitzvah, and the mitzvah was done in a manner of completing the mitzvah, the erva is gone. Essentially, this is going to go with the opinion that we said earlier, that the erva prohibition is suspended when the mitzvah comes. And if they did a part of the mitzvah, chalitza, and one of them did it on behalf of everyone, that is suspended. That is gone. So essentially, what we have here is Tosfos says, really, the original prohibition is in place. Simply, the Torah gave us a new term. The Torah says that whoever does chalitza, shuv lo yivneh. Shuv lo yivneh means that there's a new lav, a diminished lav. The Torah extracted it from the larger super lav of kares and moved it down to a lesser lav. And Rabbi Yochanan says they all are doing it on behalf of, they all did it because one did it on behalf of all of them. So they all have the super lav moved into the lower lav. However, according to the Rashba, he's saying no. The Isser Eshesach is gone. The Isser is gone because they each had the mitzvah, and it's gone really for all of them. It's gone for all of them, and it's gone for all of them because they all had a mitzvah yesterday. And how can it be that yesterday something was permissible, then it became prohibited, then it became permissible again? It can't be. So you see the Rashba holds that Isser is gone and remains gone for all the brothers. And therefore Rabbi Yochanan says, how can it be yesterday something was permissible and today it's going to go back to an Isser? Where did that Isser come from? Because Reuven, who's dead, was married to this woman, but that Isser is already permissible. And there no new erva came into being. That's why Rabbi Yochanan says the erva is gone. The erva is gone, and so what is there? A prohibition of lo yivneh. Now, the Rambam seemingly holds that this is a derabbanan. It isn't even a d'oraisa prohibition, which would fit with Charlie. Charlie says, good, so I don't have lo yivneh, I can't remarry, but I could just marry her for myself, not for the deceased brother. So the Rambam seemingly would hold that would apply. And the Rambam says, midrabanan, there's a lo yivneh. There's a big kasha on the Rambam. The next lines in the Gemara ask according to Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, we know, holds that chayve lavin, not only a super lav of erva, of kares, but even a basic lav, also kiddushin are not teifus, kiddushin don't take effect. And so the Gemara asks on that. Now, according to the Rambam, it's a d'Rabbanan. It's not a chayve lavin. It's a d'Rabbanan. Of course, kiddushin takes effect in something that's permissible min Torah and prohibited min d'Rabbanan. So the Gemara makes no sense. So from our Gemara, we're going to have to say, without the Rambam, and the Rambam will have to explain some other way, our Gemara clearly is saying that there would be a Torah lav, but a simple lav. According to the Rashba, we're going to have to say that the erva is gone, and it can't be that yesterday was a prohibition. So today, yesterday's prohibition is here because that's gone already. In fact, it became a mitzvah on each one of the brothers. So they don't have an erva anymore. And once the chalitza is done, really the chalitza should be permissible. So here are the two aspects of Rabbi Yochanan. First point he says, you have to understand, once the Torah made it permissible, the erva is gone. How can it be yesterday this woman was a mitzvah for them to marry? Each one of them had an individual mitzvah to marry this woman. And today you want to say that it's an erva? How can it be? But the brother never remarried. There's no new Eishes Ach. And we understand this because the erva was suspended, completely ended. It was hutra. It was made permissible. So then why is there a prohibition on the brothers? Even a lesser level, a simple level, there he needs the second part. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan said two reasons. One is the erva Isser is gone. But additionally, since the brother that did chalitza on behalf of all the other brothers, now they each have the prohibition of liyivnin. That's the two aspects of Rabbi Yochanan according to the Rashba. Number one, the erva, original erva of the deceased brother, gone. That ended with the mitzvah. The mitzvah came, and each one of the surviving brothers had the mitzvah. So each one of them no longer has an erva. In fact, it would be permissible for them to marry, as Charlie asked. Let him marry. The Torah teaches, Shuv lo yivna. You did chalitza, you can't marry this woman anymore. Well, what about the other brothers? There's no erva, and they didn't do chalitza. To that, Rabbi Yochanan adds, actually, he's doing the shlichus. So, Nimtzino Lamedim, we find over here like this. According to Tosfos, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that they do the shlichus to bring it down a notch. Really, according to Tosfos, to all the brothers, it should be erva, a super lav. But since the brother that's doing evil, that's doing chalitza, is doing it on behalf of the brothers, so that everybody's in this lower level, the Torah nitkoi, that brings it down to a lesser lav. According to the Rashba, it's the other way around. Really, they should all be permitted because there's no erva anymore. But one is prohibited because he did chalitza, and the Torah said, lo yivneh, if you do chalitza, you cannot reestablish that home. Oh, so that's only him. What about the brothers? So the shlichus is actually making it a notch up, taking it from permissible to prohibition. Simple law. So that's a fundamental machlokas here in Tosfos and in the Rashba, and how to understand the mechanism of Yibum. But what we see is that the mitzvah goes to all the brothers. The mitzvah goes to all the brothers. Each one of them has the erva suspended or superseded. And then it'll either go back to the original erva, or even if it doesn't go back to the original erva, it would, like the Rashba, it'll at least remain a Isser Lav of Lo Yivneh. We have to go to Mincha. We'll leave it at that. If you have more questions on this or want it clarified, I'm happy to do so afterwards. Shukah for joining, and thank you, Joaquin.